Happy Sunday. Happy Father's Day, everybody. Welcome to episode 66 of the Lincoln Review podcast. We are live on Twitter, live on YouTube, recording for iTunes, SoundCloud, and the rest of it. Please subscribe to us. Follow me on Twitter for all of your podcast needs. And today, we're going to talk about the crisis. The crisis all over Massachusetts that probably really isn't a crisis. And that is the sorry state of the MBTA. I was going back and forth with Jim Aloisi and some other anonymous transit advocates this week about the state of the T. And it's not good. It's not good. And I was pushing back on the idea that this is a crisis, because the idea that it is a crisis means certain things have to take place immediately. There's urgency to it. We have to do something right now. Do something. Well, this has been going on for quite some time. I'm going to play a clip of Adam Riley starting out with our woes with the T this week.
Or at least that's how it is starting to feel as crews continue to try to repair the damage on the Red Line after a train came off its tracks and smashed into traffic signaling equipment near the JFK UMass station on Tuesday. Just a couple of days after, 11 people were hurt when a Green Line train derailed near Kenmore Station on Saturday. The driver of that train has since been suspended. And these are just the latest in a long line of derailments for the MBTA, which has had more than 40 train derailments in the past 5 years, the second worst record of any metro transit system in the U.S., according to...
That's pretty bad. 40 plus in the last 5 years. So 2 in a week, but we've had quite a few. I would hazard a guess that a lot of them are on the Green Line because the Green Line is ancient. But this one was on the Red Line, and it hit a bunch of equipment at the JFK UMass stop that shut down all the signals. I'm going to go first and start saying maybe move the equipment that you need to run the Red Line away from a place where a train might hit it. Just a suggestion. May want to try that instead of repairing it, and then you risk it happening again down the road. Maybe move it higher, somewhere else. There's wires you can run, but the actual equipment may be somewhere else. So this is over the past 5 years, from 2014 to 2018 inclusive. And if that's happening over the past 5 years, it just feels like since we've been, you'll see this in the clip, Charlie Chippio mentions it, it feels worse because it's happening now.
From the Boston Globe. The Red Line delays are expected to continue through Friday at least, according to T officials, as repairs proceed and transit officials signal the trains by hand. And it all couldn't come at a worse time for the transit system, which is set to implement fare hikes on July 1st, leaving some people wondering, what exactly are we paying for? Joining me to discuss are Boston City Councilor Michelle Wu, Charlie Chippio, Senior Fellow at the Pioneer Institute and former Policy Director for Governor Romney, and Chris Dempsey, Director of Transportation for Massachusetts, a coalition of organizations aiming to improve transportation across the state. Thank you all for being here.
All right.
Thank you, Adam.
I'm letting this run a little long, but
I have talked about transit problems on this set before when I'm keeping Jim's seat warm. I've done it.
I probably should have queued this up a little bit better. My apologies.
I think with some of you, maybe not all of you. This week to me feels different, and I'm wondering if you have the same feeling that I do.
I think so. I think we're in a transportation crisis, and the public understands that we are at a tipping point, both on our rails, but also on our roads at the same time. And Adam, I've heard you talk about your commute and how long it takes.
Okay, so if it's a crisis, it needs immediate action. And the immediate action that progressives like Chris want, including I've tagged Jim Aloisi in this, they want taxes. They want revenue. Nothing else can happen in this crisis except for taxes. So I'm going to pose something to all the progressives out there. If this is a genuine crisis and we're in crisis mode, what are you willing to do to get out of this crisis? Are you willing to massively reform the pensions so that the pension liability isn't over $100 million per year, that it's basically a black hole now that we can't see into an MBTA employees' pension? Are you willing to reform that to either, at the minimum, get them over to the overall state pension system, or transition them over to 401k plans like the rest of us. It's a crisis. Are you willing to do that? We'll see. Are you willing to change the work rules that have prevented the mechanics and the repairs of buses over the past 2-3 years? Are you willing to resuspend the Pacheco law or permanently repeal it? It's a crisis. What about vendor rules? Are you going to force prevailing wage measures on any vendor we have or anybody we outsource? It's a crisis. I ask that. If you're willing to say, yes, it's so bad, we're going to do all those things, because all those things prevent the T from functioning normally. They siphon much-needed money away from repairs, maintenance, improvements to, well, an underfunded pension that can't possibly sustain itself. Or are you willing, it's a crisis, are you willing to give Charlie Baker, Emperor Palpatine, powers to do whatever he wants to the T? Because I guarantee you he can fix it. I guarantee you give him all the powers he wants, give him carte blanche to do whatever he wants to do, and he will fix it. But are you? Are you? I don't think you are.
Takes you to get to the North Shore. So this is not isolated to just the red line or just the green line. It's a total system breakdown, and we need urgency from our elected leaders to bring change.
It seems to me like it's
Just point of clarification. This is a real problem, but it's a good problem to have because we are in the economy in Boston and metro area is fantastic. We are lucky to have such a booming economy, but it's a problem we have to fix. Now, not every problem is a crisis. It's a serious problem. We got to get on it. We have to work methodically, and since Governor Baker and his administration have taken charge, they've put into place the Fiscal Control Board of the MBTA, lots of positive steps that have gotten some of the I guess, inefficiencies out of it, but it's still massively inefficient and needs a lot more to get into, a lot more change, as I just mentioned before. Now, are progressives willing to do that and just say, well, it's a problem we'll perpetually fix and do the necessary things?
The way people are feeling right now, but also the way some powerful individuals and institutions are responding to this. I want to just mention a couple things that caught my eye. The Boston Globe ran an editorial titled "Going Off the Rails on Charlie Baker's Train." I wanted to play Crazy Train in the show, and I wasn't able to do it.
That's why I did that for
To my mind, this was the toughest editorial that I've seen the Globe ed page run about the governor. Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, tweeted that this week's MBTA...
I'm going to fast forward
during...
Right, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, look, the
Charlie.
difference is I think that the time when people were even more kind of wound up about this was 2015, during Snowmageddon. But I think it was different then because everybody was sort of more... it was impetus for everybody to kind of work together and try to fix it. Now it's a few years later, and there's much more anger. Not so sort of. It's not so sort of.
People want it fixed, and when they want it fixed,
and there's not a once-in-a-generation weather event that you can blame it on. Michelle, well, let me ask you. You've been very critical of the status quo and the way the governor is approaching the status quo. As you guys know, and many of our viewers will know, the governor has said his administration is going to spend $8 billion over the next 5 years to do things like replace track, replace signals. What is Governor Baker not doing that he should be?
We are at this place now of 2 major incidents in a week, right before fares are going to go up, people being driven scared away from public transportation in droves now. We are at this point because of a failure to act all along the way for several years of this administration, and the constant refusal.
Well, let's clarify that right there. This administration. Now, it's important that we say that the previous administration for 2 terms really didn't do a thing. And the legislature, which really runs this, the legislature is the key here, and what laws they're willing to reform, put on the books to improve the process. Charlie Baker's very limited in his capacity to affect change at the MBTA. And to the previous administration for Deval Patrick, so was he. This really boils down to what the legislature needs to do. Now, the automatic response from a lot of Democrats and progressives is just more money. Well, if you put more money into a broken system, the system will remain broken, and if you expand that system, then you're building in even larger inefficiencies and larger future deficits down the road, which you'll eventually have to bail out. They're about to get into Councilwoman Wu's vision. I don't know what that means. I mean, she wasn't very specific.
To say we're going to seek a big picture vision and find revenue for it. Now just trying to define progress as having a plan to reach bare minimum functionality a number of years from now, and then claiming victory when we're inching in the right direction. This is not acceptable anymore for the region.
Okay, so indulge me and engage in a little thought experiment here. Let's say you were governor of Massachusetts. What would you be doing right now in the wake of these two derailments?
We need to have a big picture vision to invest in the MBTA, to recognize just how important of a lifeline that is. That means finding new revenue sources, going to the legislature and saying congestion pricing, gas tax, surcharge on Uber and Lyft, everything's on.
More money, more money, more money. And Adam's question was specific. What would you do to fix it? The stuff I mentioned earlier would actually fix the problem of an inefficient organization that needs to be run better, where you'd build in that sustainability everybody talks about on the left. I'm for sustainability. I want a functioning T. It's a vital part of our economy in Massachusetts. It has to function. But these types of things where it's just a cash grab aren't going to do it. We need to be specific.
On the table. Let's figure out how we find the revenues, and then
beyond
what is
revenues?
The plan? Electrification, regional rail, more frequent service. How do we get to that level of service, the geographic footprint, the system that our riders deserve?
There's a lot of complex stuff in there which we unfortunately probably don't have time to unpack, but do you have a sense of what
This is a drawback of this, the format. Maybe they at one point could get into more deeper things. Welcome to come on this podcast. I know nobody will. Well, actually, Jim has said, Jim Aloisi, former transportation secretary, has said he would come back on this summer. Going to do that. And I might invite Ed Lyons back on that to talk about this. But these are a lot of platitudes. It's a problem. We got to get specific into what you want to change. And you know what? If you do all the changes that I'd recommend, and you've fixed a lot of the inefficiencies and the way the MBTA functions, I'd be open to new revenue if you can justify its existence and why we need it.
the price tag would be for what you're talking about? I mean, if the governor's $8 billion in 5 years to make repairs and get toward the way things ought to be bare minimum isn't enough, how much money would what you're thinking of cost?
So the reports are putting out more and more different types of numbers. I think the bottom line is that there's a tremendous cost to doing nothing and to delaying.
So when asked how much, more and more different types of numbers. Glad we cleared that up.
The longer that we delay, the more expensive it is, even just to fix it to the point where it barely works. And so these revenue sources together would generate billions of dollars. There are, the same advocacy organizations have defined a list of potential policy changes that would generate $20 billion over the next 10 years.
Okay.
So how much would it cost, and what priority level do we assign it? I think that's a larger conversation with the legislature.
Well,
See,
that's
I'm
an
all for
answer.
things
$20
like
billion.
The gas tax and
By the way, that's half the Massachusetts budget for a year. Now, granted, she said over 10 years, so all right, $2 billion a year. Massachusetts budget is about $40 billion a year. That's quite a significant tax increase. And are the taxpayers in Massachusetts willing to put that much money, $2 billion per year, into a system that already doesn't work? That's a lot of trust.
congestion pricing and things like that. But I think this is a much more nuanced and a much more complicated problem. You have a system that, for 25 years we ignored maintenance to put money into expansion.
Previous administration.
And so we find ourselves $10 billion in the hole when it comes to our maintenance needs.
Just things operating the way they should.
At the same time, we've had $1 billion a year available to fix that, and the T has only been able to get $440 million a year out the door until recently. Thankfully,
why was that?
Well, because the MBTA is such a dysfunctional place. Now it has gotten better. It's still not great. It has gotten better.
The governor's basically taken control of
Yes.
it, changed the way it operates.
But the problem
Not fully. Let's dig into that a little bit. He hasn't taken over full control of it. We need a lot more control to take place.
is that if you were to hand the T $2 billion more today, I'm not convinced it would be any better. That's why this is
because there's no big picture vision for what they're
part
aiming
of it.
for.
That's part of it, but
Right, hang on.
definitely,
I'll let Charlie finish.
I agree with that. But also because they have no capability or capacity to spend that money.
The idea that there's problems. The idea that there'd be no that a lack of a big picture vision is what's inhibiting it from functioning properly. Oh boy. Look, I think we can all agree in Massachusetts that we want this to work, but we got to be honest about what changes need to take place. I admire Charlie for this. I don't agree with him on congestion pricing because I think that hurts the people that can least afford to pay the congestion price would be, middle and low and working class workers going into the city, and that money then goes to the T. Okay, but if your desired effect is to reduce traffic by congestion pricing, you may achieve your desired effect and reduce congestion, reduce traffic, and then you're short on your money that you plan to pay. So it needs to be more sustainable than that. But the problems he's alluding to, we don't focus on that. It's just massively a dysfunctional organization. And it's not because of big pictures.
In a way that would really improve things.
Adam, governors and legislatures around the country are stepping up on this issue, and it's in places you might not expect. Ohio, Alabama, places where Republican governors...
All right, I'm going to pause this right here. Chris is, he's going to run, toot the horn about, how we can just build more and do more and everything will be great. And he also sounds a lot like Beto O'Rourke. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that whenever he speaks, that nice progressive deep tone, the voice. He seems like a nice guy. He's just wrong on this. Okay, so this is an article from earlier in the year. The MBTA pension crisis should be a priority. Well, they're calling it a crisis too. Okay, what are you willing to do about the crisis? Like I said, please give Charlie Baker all the power he wants to fix the crisis. Do it. It's a crisis. He could fix it if he was given the carte blanche to do it. You scroll down a little bit and you find that by the year 2022, let's see here. Where is it? 2022. We will be reaching a point where, right here, last year, the shortfall for the pension was $90 million for the year. Now it's about $100 million, or about 23% of payroll. And all that's diverted to this annual pension shortfall, reversing available funds for improving service ridership experience. $100 million per year. Now, a decade ago, they say it was $40 million. And by fiscal 2022, 3 years from now, the subsidy payment could reach $140 million. Now, $140 million per year going to pay very generous retirement benefits for people that were able to retire in their mid-50s that, we can't actually even afford it. We can't actually afford it. Some massive reform needs to take place. That $100 million a year could do a lot of good to improve the function of the tracks, the newer trains, all the things that we're talking about, running more frequent lines. All that stuff could happen, but we need an organization that is fully functional, and we don't have one, and we need one. I'm looking forward to having Jim Aloisi back on the podcast. I'd love to actually get Governor Baker on here. I don't know if he'd do it, to talk about what we could do specifically to the T. I'll even invite Michelle Wu on if she'd like to discuss specifically what she thinks can be fixed with the T. I know she wants to make it free. I don't know how that would be paid for. I'd like to get into that too, just specifically. I think we can have a reasonable conversation. I don't want to demonize anybody. I don't like it when I get demonized for this because I want to see it solved, but we're not talking about the specific things we can do to solve it, and I think we should. If you're with that, then if you agree with me that we can do specific things to fix it, instead of just saying more money will fix it without explaining how more money will fix it, because as we talked about, we don't even have the capacity to spend the money that they do have allocated towards it right now. So if people are serious about it, if it's a crisis, you'd be willing to do anything to fix it, which is kind of why I don't think it's a crisis, but that doesn't mean it's not a major problem for us to fix. There are real crises in the world. We have an opioid epidemic. Our inner city schools need massive improvements. Every grade and generation that goes through those schools is getting incredibly the short end of the stick. We need to fix those things. We need to fix a lot of things. And this is a problem, and we're going to do it. But a crisis, well, I don't know.